One morning, my daughter collapsed on my doorstep, her body broken, her eyes telling a story of betrayal. She wasn't fleeing a monster in the dark. She was running from the monsters she called family, right in the light of day. They wanted her gone. I was about to find out they already took everything else. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The morning sun was just starting to burn off the Seattle fog, painting the sky in pale shades of orange and pink. I was on the front porch, tending to my geraniums, a ritual I'd kept since my husband George passed away a year ago. It was a simple, quiet life, one I had earned after decades as a child psychologist, but that calm was about to be shattered. A heavy thud on the porch steps made me turn around. My heart seized. Harper, my daughter, was huddled on the top step, trembling. She was just lying there, not moving. Her clothes were disheveled, a stark contrast to the perfect image she always presented. A dark bruise was blooming on her cheek, a grotesque shadow in the morning light. On her arm, a tiny puncture mark, red and angry, stood out against her pale skin. It looked like a needle mark. I knelt beside her, my old bones protesting. "Harper, honey, what happened?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked at me, her eyes clouded and unfocused, as if she were lost in a nightmare. She tried to speak, her lips forming words, but only a choked sob came out. She just pointed a shaking hand toward her stomach. I helped her up and got her inside, her body feeling heavy and limp. She stumbled, and I had to put an arm around her to hold her steady. I laid her on the couch in the living room and ran to the kitchen for a cold compress. My hands were shaking, but my mind was already racing, analyzing every detail. The bruise on her cheek was unlike a simple fall. Its odd shape suggested a blunt object. The needle mark, small but precise, spoke to a deeper kind of maliciousness. This wasn't just a fight. This was a deliberate attack. I sat with her, cleaning the blood from a small cut on her lip. She finally managed to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Marcus and Jasmine, they did this to me. They want me gone. I'm so sorry, Mum. I didn't know where else to go." My blood ran cold. Marcus, her husband, and Jasmine, his new financial advisor, were the last people I would have suspected of doing something so brutal. I had seen them at Harper's place just a few weeks ago, smiling and toasting to what they called their new life. I remembered the email Harper had sent me a few days before. It said something about Marcus asking her to sign some documents to finalize their financial plans. I had just ignored it, thinking it was just a typical matter. I had no idea that it was the beginning of their plan. I went to my old study, the room where I had spent countless hours with my patients, a place of peace and trust. Now, it would become a war room. I found my old medical bag and took out a sterile kit. My hands moved on their own, guided by decades of training. I took a small sample from the injection site, sealing it in a plastic bag. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew this wasn't an ordinary crime. I also went outside to check my old security camera. My hands fumbled with the antiquated controls. The camera was hidden in the ivy on the side of the house, a relic from a brief bout of paranoia a few years back. The footage was grainy and dark, but I could make out two figures leaving my porch around 5:55 a.m. The shapes were tall and broad. It was Marcus, and beside him, the distinct silhouette of Jasmine. My heart pounded as I watched them disappear into the early morning gloom. I knew this wasn't just about my daughter being beaten up. This was about something much bigger, something they were willing to do anything to get. I looked back at Harper, sleeping on the couch, her face bruised and swollen. She was a broken version of the vibrant woman I had raised, and a fire ignited inside me, a fire for justice. The quiet life was over. The war had begun. The heavy door to my study closed with a soft click, sealing Harper and me in. The quiet in that room was a sanctuary, but it also felt like the silence before a storm. I gently placed the sealed sample of whatever they injected her with onto my desk, the tiny plastic bag, a cold piece of evidence. This was no longer just a mother helping her daughter. This was Dr. Abby Jones, retired psychologist, stepping back into detective mode. I needed to secure Harper first. My professional instincts kicked in. I started by giving her a mild sedative and some painkillers. The bruises on her face and arm were horrifying, but the fear in her eyes was the real wound. She was completely shut down, a victim of psychological and physical abuse. I knew Marcus and Jasmine hadn't just used their fists. They had used gaslighting and terror, methods far more insidious. As Harper finally drifted off to a fitful sleep on my examination couch, I went back to the front room. It was time to call in a professional who dealt with the kind of filth Marcus was wallowing in. I pulled out my old address book, flipping past colleagues and friends until I found the number for Detective Joe Sullivan. He was an old, trustworthy friend of George's, and a man who understood the shadows of Seattle better than anyone. I kept my voice low, matter of fact. "Joe, it's Abby. I need your help. It's an emergency, and it involves Harper, Marcus, and what I believe is a deliberate chemical assault." I briefly outlined the situation, the bruises, the needle mark, and Harper's terrifying whispers. Joe was silent for a long moment. Then his voice came back, grave but firm. "Stay put, Abby. Don't touch anything else. I'm coming right now, and I'm coming alone. You're talking about a lot more than just domestic battery here." While waiting for Joe, I did the next logical thing. I checked Harper's finances. When George passed, he left Harper a substantial inheritance, a $10 million life insurance payout, which was supposed to secure her future. I opened my laptop and logged into Harper's financial accounts, using the password she had given me for emergencies years ago. What I saw made my breath hitch. The primary beneficiary of George's massive policy, once clearly listed as Harper, was now listed as a trustee fund. Not only that, but the fund was set up only 6 months ago. The new beneficiary for the $10 million policy wasn't Harper at all. Harper was only designated to receive a one-time payment of $100,000, with the remaining $9.9 million going into the trust. My fingers trembled as I clicked on the trust documents. I traced the details. The trust's co-founders were none other than Marcus Jones and Jasmine. They had changed the policy after George's death, using some obscure clause, and I was certain, forged documents. The truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about adultery or anger. This was a sophisticated financial crime, and Harper was being systematically eliminated. The beating, the drugging, the fear. It was all part of a calculated plan to declare her mentally unfit, so the trustee fund could legally seize the $10 million. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. I looked at the caller ID, feeling a cold, professional hatred rise inside me. I didn't answer. I just let the silence stretch, listening to the phone ring 3, 4, 5 times. Then a text message came through. "Where is she, Abby? You are interfering in family matters. You don't know what you're doing. Let me talk to Harper or things will get very difficult for everyone." I didn't reply. I simply took a screenshot of the text message, logged out of the financial accounts, and waited for Joe. The evidence was building. The video, the needle sample, the fraudulent insurance documents, and now a veiled threat. Marcus wasn't just a brute. He was a desperate killer. and I was stepping directly into his line of fire. I looked at the dark bruise on Harper's face, then at the $10 million figure flashing in my mind, and I knew I had to fight fire with ice-cold precision. Detective Joe Sullivan arrived within 15 minutes. He didn't come in a squad car. He showed up in his personal, beat-up Ford pickup, wearing an old leather jacket that smelled faintly of coffee and rain. He took one look at Harper, sleeping with her face turned to the wall, and his expression shifted from casual concern to grim determination. "Abby, tell me everything," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. I walked him through it, piece by piece. First, the physical evidence, the bruises, the needle mark, and the small baggie containing the trace chemical residue. Joe, a former narcotics officer, nodded slowly as he examined the syringe mark. "Not a typical sedative," he observed. "Looks professional. They weren't trying to calm her down. They were trying to incapacitate her for something else." Then came the financial evidence. I showed him the screenshot of the insurance policy, the $10 million payout being rerouted to the Marcus and Jasmine trustee fund, and the paltry $100,000 left for Harper. I explained my suspicion that they were planning to use the assault and drugging to claim Harper was mentally incompetent, thereby sealing their access to the funds. Joe leaned back, running a hand over his tired face. "This is big, Abby. A domestic case that escalates to $10 million in fraud. This isn't just Marcus being a jerk. This is a calculated plot. We need to find that new physician and the paperwork they used to change the beneficiary." I agreed, and we moved to the third piece of the puzzle, the video footage. I played the grainy clip from my old security camera. Joe watched intently as the two shadowy figures moved across my porch at 5:55 a.m. "That's Marcus, sure," Joe confirmed. "But getting a conviction on a low-res video is tough. We need context. We need motive. And we need to understand how they managed to change a high-value insurance policy without a massive red flag." I returned to my desk and opened the computer again. "I found this," I said, pointing to a cryptic email exchange on Harper's hard drive. The emails were dated a week before the attack. Marcus and Jasmine were discussing optimization protocols and finalizing the contract with the Alpha Group. I explained my working theory. Jasmine, being a financial manager, likely used a shell company or a legitimate-sounding third party, this Alpha Group, to obscure the direct beneficiary change. "That's our lead," Joe stated, his eyes now sharp and focused. "The Alpha Group. They won't make it easy to trace, but if they are involved in the fraud, they're the weak link." We spent the next few hours meticulously downloading the financial records, creating hard copies, and duplicating the video evidence. As we worked, I decided on the next move. "I need to talk to Jasmine," I announced. "Not as a threat, but as an investigator. I need to see her reaction when I ask her about the Alpha Group and about George's policy. As a former therapist, I know how to read micro-expressions. I need to see the guilt." Joe hesitated. "That's dangerous, Abby. She's working with a man who hits his wife and attempts to drug her. And they have 10 million reasons to keep you silent." "Exactly," I countered, the fire in my eyes growing stronger. "And I have one reason to risk it all. My daughter. I'll go in disguised as a new client, someone looking to invest a small fortune. She won't suspect a thing. I need to analyze my enemy's behavior." Joe reluctantly agreed, but only after making me promise to wear a small, discreet recording device he happened to have in his kit. He knew I wouldn't back down. The plan was set. I would step back into the world of high-stakes financial dealings, using my own professional facade as a weapon. Marcus and Jasmine had underestimated the power of a desperate mother and the cunning of a retired psychologist. The hunt for the Alpha Group and the true motive behind George's death had officially begun. The recording device Joe gave me was a tiny, high-tech piece of equipment, barely larger than a quarter. I secured it beneath the lapel of my best cashmere blazer. I had to look the part. A wealthy, recently widowed woman, slightly out of her depth in high finance, yet holding a substantial portfolio. The perfect pigeon for a predator like Jasmine. Jasmine's office was located in a sleek glass and steel high-rise overlooking Puget Sound. It felt cold and clinical, a fortress of money and ambition. The reception area was all muted tones and abstract art, perfectly designed to project competence and trustworthiness. I was shown into a private office. Jasmine was exactly as I remembered, impeccably dressed, sharp, and possessing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She radiated a false warmth, the kind of professional empathy that was meticulously practiced. "Dr. Jones," she greeted me, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "It's a pleasure. Marcus told me you might be looking into some strategic estate planning. Please, call me Jasmine." I sat across from her, remembering all my training. I adopted the persona of a slightly anxious but intelligent retiree, a little worried about the long-term security of my assets. "Thank you, Jasmine," I said, my voice smooth and controlled. "My late husband, George, handled everything, and honestly, all these financial terms, they're overwhelming. I'm sitting on a substantial liquid portfolio, over $5 million, mostly in municipal bonds, and I need guidance. Marcus spoke highly of your aggressive strategies." That was the first subtle needle. I watched her face. Jasmine's smile widened slightly at aggressive strategies, a flash of genuine avarice crossing her features before she masked it, a good indicator of her professional pathology. She launched into her standard pitch, talking about diversified portfolios and growth opportunities. I listened patiently, occasionally asking naive questions about risk tolerance. Then I steered the conversation. "Speaking of George," I began, making the transition seamless. "I was reviewing some of his old insurance notes. He was always so meticulous. He often used a firm called Alpha Group for some of his high-value dealings. Do you happen to know them? Are they still reliable in this volatile market?" I watched her like a hawk. At the mention of Alpha Group, Jasmine's eyes flickered, just for a split second, a minuscule dilation of the pupil. Her smile didn't move, but the blood drained slightly from her knuckles as she gripped her pen. It was the involuntary physical reaction of someone whose secret had just been touched. "Oh, Alpha Group," she replied, her voice remaining artificially breezy. "Yes, they're known in the industry, more specialized. They handle very specific, often complex restructuring. We tend to focus on more direct client strategies here. Why do you ask? Was George considering something with them?" "No, no," I assured her, playing the part of the slightly confused widow. "Just old files. He had a tendency to sign off on things I didn't fully understand." I leaned in, my voice lowering slightly, hitting her with the second, more direct strike. He was particularly concerned about a large life policy, a $10 million payout, being overly exposed. He mentioned something about needing to assign a secondary beneficiary trustee to optimize the tax implications. Does that sound familiar in today's climate? This time, the reaction was more pronounced. She coughed lightly, adjusting her scarf, a textbook displacement activity. "Well, every high net worth policy needs optimization, Dr. Jones. It's standard practice to use a trust structure for tax efficiency and asset protection. It's what we specialize in here." "I see," I replied, maintaining a calm, analytical gaze. "So, in theory, if one wanted to fully control such a large policy, say, divert the primary payout from a family member who might be mentally unstable, how easily could one reroute it to a trust where the financial advisor and a relative were the sole trustees? The room went silent. The easy professionalism vanished. Her face hardened, and her eyes narrowed, stripping away the practiced charm. She knew I knew. She realized I was asking about Harper and the 10 million. The pretense was over. "Dr. Jones," she said, her voice now cold steel, "I think our conversation has moved beyond simple estate planning. If you have specific concerns about your daughter's affairs, you need to address them with your attorney. I cannot discuss other client matters with you." "Of course," I replied, standing up, my composure absolute. "I understand completely. Just curious about these aggressive strategies. Thank you for your time, Jasmine. I have a great deal to think about." As I walked out of that sterile office, I felt the small recording device pressing against my chest. Jasmine had confirmed everything I needed to know without uttering a single confession. Her defensive reaction, her involuntary physical cues, and her sudden shift in demeanor all pointed to one truth. She and Marcus were the architects of the Alpha Group fraud, and they were attempting to seize Harper's inheritance by declaring her mentally incapacitated. I knew then that their plan was not just about money, it was about the cold-blooded elimination of an obstacle, and I was now the next obstacle in their way. My session with Jasmine had confirmed my worst fears. The insurance scam was real, and the look in her eyes proved she was capable of anything. Now, I needed to solidify the link between the Alpha Group, the massive 10 million payout, and the possibility of murder. I went straight back to Joe's secure office. We played the audio recording of my conversation with Jasmine, and Joe made notes on her vocal stresses and pauses. "She cracked when you mentioned the secondary beneficiary trustee," Joe observed, tapping his pen on the desk. "She knows the legal definition. It's the mechanism they used to declare Harper incompetent and transfer the funds to their trust." "Exactly," I agreed. "Now we need to trace the money. Specifically, the paper trail leading from George's death to the establishment of the Alpha Group's trust fund." I took a deep breath, revisiting the grief I had buried a year ago. George, my husband, was an avid hunter. He had died during a solo trip to the Olympic National Forest. The official report said it was a hunting accident, a fall from a ridge. I pulled out the old file I had kept. It was thin, filled with George's life insurance documents, his final will, and the toxicology report from the initial autopsy. I started rereading the toxicology, this time not as a grieving wife, but as a forensic analyst. The report mentioned trace amounts of several compounds, all dismissed as either environmental contaminants or common over-the-counter medications. But one name jumped out at me: tetrodotoxin, or TTX. I froze. TTX is a powerful neurotoxin, famously found in pufferfish. A tiny amount is enough to paralyze and kill. It's difficult to detect if the body is cremated or if only standard tests are run. It causes symptoms that mimic heart failure or even a stroke, which could easily be mistaken for complications from a fall, especially in the rugged conditions of the Olympic mountains. I remembered George's eccentric hobby, collecting rare botanical samples. He had a small greenhouse where he experimented with exotic flora. The memory clicked into place. George had once shown me a jar containing some unusual dried plant matter. He called it the hunter's bane, a highly potent natural poison he'd found in South America. He'd meticulously logged everything, but I hadn't paid much attention at the time. A terrifying thought took hold. What if George hadn't fallen? What if Marcus, or Jasmine, had administered a small, paralyzing dose of TTX, making him incapable of protecting himself ensuring he would fall from that cliff. It would look exactly like an accident. I shared my terrifying theory with Joe. Joe, George was a meticulous man. He wouldn't have slipped. And if I recall correctly, his initial toxicology report only noted trace TTX, which the coroner brushed off as insignificant. Joe looked skeptical, then serious. Abby, this is a huge leap. We're going from financial fraud to murder one. That's a different jurisdiction, a different ballgame. We need solid proof that TTX was present, and we need to link the motive to the crime. The motive is 10 million, Joe, I stated flatly, and the link is Marcus. He handled all the funeral arrangements, including the quick cremation, citing George's specific wishes. He rushed it. He also happened to be George's hiking buddy on that last trip, according to the records. We had found the necessary plot point. Marcus was with George in the woods. Marcus controlled the body. Marcus controlled the insurance payout afterward. I needed George's old research notes, which were still stored in a locked safe deposit box at his old law firm. I made a new plan. I would retrieve the notes, find the specific antidote or counteragent for TTX, and then find the digital trail of Marcus buying the poison. I realized I couldn't trust the family lawyer who handled George's estate, as they were the same firm Marcus was still using. I used a discreet service to obtain a court order, citing an unresolved tax matter that required access to George's private documents. The key was to move quickly and quietly before Marcus realized I was looking into his father's death, not just his wife's health. The following morning, I went to the law firm. I showed my court order, and a nervous junior associate brought me the box. Inside, amidst old journals, I found it, George's meticulously detailed research notebook. On a page dated 3 weeks before his death, under the heading TTX Synthesis and Counteragents, there was a chilling entry, a small handwritten equation next to a scribbled list of rare chemical suppliers. I photographed the page, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew then that the insurance fraud was just the cover story. The real story was that Marcus and Jasmine didn't just want the money, they were already cold-blooded killers. And they had been planning this for over a year. I now held the key to unlocking a murder case hidden under a veil of accidental death and family drama. My grief transformed into an iron resolve. Finding George's notebook was the defining moment. It confirmed my worst fears and gave me a focus. Finding the source of the tetrodotoxin, or TTX, and linking it directly to Marcus. I rushed the notebook, along with the other evidence, back to Joe. Joe was skeptical, but couldn't ignore the meticulous detail of George's handwriting. "Your husband was preparing for something, Abby," he said, flipping through the pages detailing the molecular structure of the poison. "This isn't a scientist's curiosity. It's a person preparing for a chemical attack." We focused on the list of suppliers George had scrawled next to his TTX notes. They were mostly obscure, specialized chemical distributors. Marcus was not a chemist, so he had to have purchased it from an outside source. Our breakthrough came when we cross-referenced the supplier list with Marcus's credit card activity, which Joe was able to access through his network of contacts in financial forensics. Marcus had gone to great lengths to hide his purchase. He hadn't used his main accounts. Instead, a few weeks before George's death, Marcus made a large purchase of $1,200 from a company called Green Earth Labs in San Diego. The purchase description simply said, "Specialized gardening supplements." "Specialized gardening supplements," I scoffed. George's notes are about a fatal neurotoxin. Marcus wouldn't have known how to synthesize it, but he could have bought it pre-extracted, disguised as something else. Joe tracked the company down. Green Earth Labs is a shell corporation, Abby. It was established 6 months ago. And guess who's listed as the primary shareholder and legal contact? Jasmine, I stated, the realization chilling my blood. Bingo, Joe confirmed. Jasmine created the shell company, used her financial expertise to mask the transaction, and sold the TTX to Marcus under the guise of gardening supplements. They didn't just steal from Harper. They ran a sophisticated murder-for-hire operation, with Marcus as the muscle and Jasmine as the logistics expert. The discovery of the shell company was the twist of the rerouted funds, revealing the core financial conspiracy. It showed how they were attempting to launder the insurance money while setting up Harper to be declared mentally unfit. My next move was deeply personal. I needed to know if Harper had any conscious recollection of the time leading up to George's death. I went back to my study, where Harper was still recovering, now more lucid, but emotionally fragile. I used my old skills as a child psychologist, employing gentle, non-directive interview techniques, avoiding any harsh questions. I asked her about the last few months she spent with her father. "Did your dad seem scared, honey?" I asked softly, sitting next to her. Harper frowned, trying to remember through the fog of the sedatives. "He was secretive, Mum. He kept saying he was closing the loop, and he kept a little glass jar of dry leaves in his desk drawer. He told me if anything ever happened, I should burn the jar and scatter the ashes in the garden." I felt a surge of adrenaline, the hunter's bane that George had shown me. He was afraid. He knew Marcus was planning something, and he had prepared for it. And did he ever mention Marcus being angry about money? Harper nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. Marcus was always furious about Dad's will. Dad had set up the 10 million policy to protect me from Marcus. Marcus told him he was going to fix it. He even yelled once, "I will not let a weak mind control my destiny." That was it. Marcus's own words. The motive was greed, masked by a perverse sense of entitlement. I then showed Harper the forged insurance documents. She stared at the papers listing Marcus and Jasmine as the sole trustees. The physical evidence of her own beating was nothing compared to the shock of seeing her husband's blatant betrayal. "They killed Dad," Harper whispered, a terrible certainty in her voice. "And they were going to erase me, too." The emotional trauma was immense, but the truth was beginning to empower her. This was the first stage of the twist of humanistic healing, where the victim finds strength in the terrible clarity of the betrayal. Harper's cooperation was no longer passive. It was the active rage of a daughter betrayed, ready to fight back. I had the TTX connection, the shell company, and Marcus's own words from Harper's memory. The last thing I needed was the antidote itself. George wouldn't just have a poison, he would have a cure. His notebook mentioned a counteragent compound that he had synthesized and stored for emergency use. The location was a hidden compartment in the old stone fireplace mantelpiece, a spot I had never known about. That night, after securing the house, I meticulously searched the mantelpiece. My fingers traced a faint seam in the stone until a small, barely noticeable latch clicked. Inside was a small, sealed vial containing a clear liquid. The label was written in George's familiar handwriting, "The fail-safe." I had found George's final, desperate attempt at self-preservation, and now it was my weapon for vengeance. I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. The fail-safe vial was a revelation, but also a terrifying risk. George had left behind the antidote, but for the plan to work, I needed Marcus to believe he was in complete control. My next move was to create a confrontation that would make him overconfident and lead him directly into the trap. I decided to go directly to Marcus's territory. His main business was a massive, high-end investment firm downtown, a place where he played the role of a successful entrepreneur, far removed from the dirt and violence he inflicted on Harper. I wanted to shake his foundation in front of his peers. First, I had to ensure Harper was safe and ready. I gently woke her. "Harper," I said, my voice firm. "They killed your father and they tried to kill you to take the 10 million. Are you ready to face him? Not as his victim, but as the witness to a murder." Harper looked pale, but her eyes held a new, steely resolve. "He ruined my life. He took Dad. I won't hide any more, Mum. Tell me what I need to do." I outlined the plan. She would be waiting nearby with Joe, ready to emerge at the critical moment. Her appearance would be the twist of healing, proof that she was not the mentally unstable woman Marcus claimed she was. Next, the preparation for the confrontation. I put the vial of the fail-safe in a secure, hidden pocket of my jacket. I also prepared a digital presentation, a series of slides showing the Alpha Group Shell Corporation details, the $10 million policy transfer, and George's research notes on TTX. This presentation was a bluff. I would only show the cover slides, letting Marcus's paranoia fill in the rest. I called Marcus directly, using a burner phone Joe had provided. "Marcus, it's Abby," I stated, cutting straight to the point. "I know about the 10 million. I know about the Alpha Group." He laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You think you can play games with me, old woman? Your daughter is unstable. You're losing it too." "I have proof," I countered, my voice low and steady. "I have George's original files. Meet me at your office in 1 hour. Alone. If you don't come, I'm taking this evidence straight to the local news and the federal prosecutor. You lose everything before lunch." The threat of public exposure always works on people like Marcus. He needed his reputation to maintain his fraud. He agreed, his tone shifting from mockery to cold fury. "Don't be late, Abby. You're making a terrible mistake." I arrived at his skyscraper precisely on time. The investment office was a hub of manicured activity. I ignored the glances of the young brokers and walked directly to Marcus's corner office. He was waiting, his tie slightly loosened, radiating nervous tension. The confidence he usually projected was fraying at the edges. "Where is it?" he demanded, skipping any pleasantries. "The proof. Show me the files, you old fool." I didn't sit down. I walked slowly to his vast mahogany desk, placing a thin, nondescript USB drive on the polished wood. "The files aren't what you need to worry about, Marcus," I said. "You need to worry about what I know. I know about the TTX." The word hit him with brutal force. His face went white. He wasn't expecting me to know about the poison, the real crime hidden behind the financial fraud. He staggered back slightly, clutching the edge of his chair. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his facade completely broken. "George died in an accident." "No," I insisted, my voice gaining strength. "George was paralyzed with tetrodotoxin, administered by his hiking buddy, then pushed to look like a fall. You set up the Alpha Group with Jasmine to ensure the 10 million was already rerouted. That wasn't just greed, Marcus. That was calculated murder. And I have the failsafe." I pulled out the digital tablet, connecting the USB drive to show the presentation's cover slide. It was stark. Just the words TTX, synthesis and counteragents in George's handwriting, overlaid with a graphic of the TTX molecular structure. Marcus lunged. He wasn't after the tablet, he was after me. He wanted to silence the person who knew the truth about his murder. His hands reached for my throat, pure animal rage in his eyes. This was the moment of physical conflict. I dodged him, the years of self-defense practice kicking in. I didn't fight back. I simply evaded, leading him on. He crashed into his large credenza, sending a stack of quarterly reports flying. He scrambled up, his face a mask of primal fury. "You're making a big mistake," he roared, attracting worried glances from the secretaries outside. "The only mistake was trusting you with my daughter," I replied, standing my ground. I stared at him, my gaze unwavering. The power dynamic had shifted completely. I had the truth, and he had only terror. The stage was set for the final, devastating reveal. I knew my timing had to be perfect. The twist of healing was about to enter the room. Marcus was breathing hard, leaning against the filing cabinet, his face a sickening mix of sweat and disbelief. He was still trying to process the fact that I knew about TTX, the deadly secret he thought was buried with my husband, George. "You're hallucinating, Abby," he snarled, trying to recover his composure. "You're just an old woman with a bruised daughter and a paranoid imagination. This TTX nonsense is a lie." "Is it?" I challenged, taking a step closer to his desk. "Tell me, Marcus, does specialized gardening supplements sound like a good cover for a lethal neurotoxin? Because that's what you bought from the Alpha Group 6 months ago, Jasmine's shell company. You and your little partner in crime are not just thieves, you're murderers." He lunged again, more desperate this time. I quickly sidestepped, and he slammed his shoulder against the edge of the desk, cursing under his breath. The secretaries outside were definitely listening now. This was exactly the public spectacle I needed. "I tried to be discreet," I said, my voice rising slightly so the microphone on my lapel would capture the rage in his confession. "I gave you a chance to face the music quietly. But you hit my daughter, you tried to destroy her mind, and you stole her father's legacy. A legacy built on a $10 million policy you tried to reroute. You are finished." He grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from the desk, his eyes wide and terrifying. "You're going to regret this, Abby," he threatened, raising the weapon. "You should have kept your mouth shut and taken your $100,000. Now I'm taking everything, including your life." "You already tried that, Marcus," I replied, standing my ground. I didn't flinch, even as he stood poised to strike. "You tried it with George, and you tried it with Harper. But unlike your victims, I came prepared." This was the critical moment for the plot twist of revenge. I slowly reached into the hidden pocket of my jacket, not pulling out the fail-safe vial, but a small, nondescript black device. I clicked it once, and a digital voice, a perfect, chilling simulation of Marcus's own voice, filled the office. The recording was spliced together from the audio I collected from Harper's USB and the conversation I had with Jasmine. The voice boomed, "I will not let a weak mind control my destiny." The TTX was the only way to get the insurance payout. Now, with Harper incompetent, the $10 million is ours. Marcus froze, the paperweight halfway to my head. His own voice, confessing to murder and fraud, echoed back at him, utterly damning. He stared at the small device in my hand, convinced I had somehow managed to get a full confession already. "I didn't say that," he screamed, dropping the paperweight which bounced harmlessly on the carpet. "That's manipulated, that's fake." "Is it?" I smiled, a cold, hard smile that held no maternal warmth. "It's a compilation of all the little lies and threats you've made over the last year. But the actual evidence is much, much worse, Marcus. It proves you poisoned your own father-in-law." As Marcus stood there, paralyzed by his own guilt and the sound of his recorded voice, the door to his office swung open. Detective Joe Sullivan stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on Marcus. "Marcus Jones," Joe said, his voice slow and authoritative. "You are under arrest." But the shock wasn't over. Joe took 2 steps to the side, revealing the person standing behind him. It was Harper. She wasn't the broken, bruised victim he had abandoned on my doorstep. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored dress, a stark contrast to the hospital gown she was in days earlier. She looked him directly in the eye, her posture straight, her gaze steady, a cold, hard certainty shining through. The bruises were still visible, but they served only as badges of honor. "I'm not incompetent, Marcus," Harper stated, her voice clear and ringing with quiet power. The entire office, including the shocked employees and Joe, could hear her. "I'm the witness to everything you've done. I'm the one who will make sure the 10 million goes to justice, not to your lies." Marcus collapsed back into his chair, physically defeated by the sight of her. The surprise and shock of seeing his mentally unstable wife standing there, strong and ready to testify, was the final blow. The twist of humanistic healing was complete. I had not only exposed a killer, but I had helped my daughter rise from the ashes of his betrayal. The game was over. Marcus's world didn't just crumble, it shattered. He stared at Harper, the living proof of his failed plot, and then at me, the quiet old woman he had utterly underestimated. The rage was still there, a flickering fire, but it was drowned out by absolute, paralyzing fear. "No, no, you can't be here," he stammered, his eyes darting wildly between Harper and the entrance where Joe stood. He took a staggering step toward Harper. "Baby, it's just a misunderstanding. Your mother is lying. She's crazy." Harper stood firm. She didn't move an inch. "I heard everything, Marcus," she said, her voice steady. "The TTX, the 10 million, the Alpha Group. You killed Dad, and you tried to kill me. You don't get to call me baby anymore." Joe, seeing Marcus's desperation, stepped forward. "Marcus Jones, you are under arrest for attempted murder, assault, and conspiracy to commit aggravated fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The next few minutes were chaos, but a controlled chaos. Marcus resisted, but only weakly, his strength gone. As Joe efficiently cuffed him, 2 uniformed officers, who had been waiting down the hall, moved in to escort him out. As they dragged him past the stunned secretaries and brokers, Marcus shouted a final, desperate plea to me. "Jasmine! She set up the company. She has the real files. I was just the muscle." I simply watched him go, a small, weary smile touching my lips. His betrayal of Jasmine was the first crack in their perfect conspiracy, and it was captured perfectly on the continuous audio recording. Joe turned to me. "That was textbook, Abby. But now, we move fast. We need Jasmine before she deletes the Alpha Group records." I nodded. The rush of adrenaline was fading, replaced by the grim clarity of the next steps. I left Joe and the officers to handle the office scene and immediately focused on my own separate mission, the final layer of revenge. I knew Jasmine had her own secure office downstairs, but she often kept her most sensitive files, the contracts, the shell company documents, and the original forged insurance papers, in a private vault at a small, discreet bank a few blocks away. George had told me about that vault years ago, joking that it was the treasure chest for his most sensitive business dealings. Marcus likely used it too. I called the bank, presenting myself as a panicked, concerned co-trustee of the Jones-Thorne family estate. I explained that I had urgent information about a fraudulent transaction and needed immediate access to the vault contents before the courts could seal it. I used the specific codes George had taught me years ago, codes Marcus and Jasmine likely never bothered to change. The bank manager was hesitant, citing protocol, but my urgency and my flawless recitation of George's old account specifics convinced him. He agreed to meet me at the vault in 30 minutes. This was the core of my plan, the moment of classic revenge. I wasn't going to wait for the police or the FBI. I was going to retrieve the original forged documents myself. I drove my car through the damp Seattle streets, my mind clear. When I arrived at the bank, the manager, a nervous man in his 50s, was waiting. He led me through the thick steel door into the vault area, a cold room filled with metal boxes. He opened the designated box. Inside, there wasn't just paper. There was a stack of cashier's checks, a small collection of rare coins, and a heavy, sealed manila envelope. The envelope was labeled in Marcus's sloppy hand, Harper Policy Originals. I opened it. Inside were the originals, the forged signature pages from George, the transfer agreement naming the Alpha Group as the primary beneficiary, and the final document prepared to certify Harper as mentally incompetent. The evidence was indisputable. But there was one more item, a small, elegant, leather-bound journal. I recognized it immediately, George's second secret diary, the one he never allowed anyone to touch. I flipped it open to the last entry, dated the day before his death. The fool Marcus thinks he is so clever. He thinks he's getting the 10 million, but he's already poisoned the well. He doesn't know I changed the beneficiary one last time, with a handwritten note in the margin. The money isn't going to Harper, and it certainly isn't going to him. It's going to the only place he can never touch it, the Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation. I gasped. George had performed the ultimate act of silent defiance. The 10 million was safe, diverted from the hands of the killers, destined for a humanistic cause. Marcus and Jasmine had murdered for money that was never truly their target. The full depth of their folly was now apparent. I quickly photographed every page of the forged documents and every word of George's final entry. Then I placed the entire envelope back into the vault. I knew better than to tamper with a crime scene. I had what I needed, the ultimate proof and the ultimate victory. I left the vault, thanked the manager, and walked back out into the light, knowing that the final devastating chapter of Marcus and Jasmine's story was about to be written. The bank vault felt miles away from the chaos of Marcus's office. I had retrieved the most critical evidence, the photographic proof of the forged insurance documents and, more importantly, George's final testament, the handwritten note diverting the 10 million to the Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation. This was the ultimate victory. The money was safe. I contacted Joe immediately, my voice filled with a quiet triumph. I have everything, Joe. The originals from the vault. And listen to this. George changed the beneficiary. Marcus murdered him for nothing. The money is going to a charity. Joe was momentarily stunned. George was always one step ahead. That's poetic justice, Abby. Now we use your evidence to bring in Jasmine. Marcus will talk when he realizes she has the upper hand, and she'll crack when she realizes he sold her out. I met Joe at the precinct. We added the high-resolution photos of the forged documents and George's final note to the existing file. The video of the assault, the trace TTX sample, and Marcus's recorded confession from the office. The case file was now massive, built on forensic detail and relentless detective work. While Joe dispatched officers to apprehend Jasmine at her high-rise, I focused on the one thing Marcus had mentioned, his desperate claim that Jasmine had the real files. I knew those files were the records of the Alpha Group shell company, the ledger of the poison purchase, and the financial maneuvers. I realized Jasmine would likely try to delete the files remotely, knowing Marcus was arrested. I needed to get to her office before she could wipe the digital trail. Joe gave me a police escort to Jasmine's building. We burst into her pristine office, but she was gone. Her expensive laptop was still open, and the screen displayed a secure VPN connection. A frantic voicemail blinked on her desk phone, It was Marcus, screaming about my accusations. "She's running," Joe said grimly, "but we have a chance to recover the data." A young cyber crimes detective, who arrived with the squad, immediately began working on Jasmine's laptop. He was able to pull up her last active screen, a secure cloud storage folder labeled Orchid. Inside the Orchid folder, we found the complete digital archive, the purchase order for the specialized gardening supplements from the Alpha Group, dated 3 weeks before George's death, the legal correspondence outlining the fraudulent beneficiary change, and a detailed plan for declaring Harper incompetent. It was the entire blueprint of their conspiracy, laid bare. The detective printed out the most damning document, a detailed financial analysis written by Jasmine, projecting the long-term tax benefits of the $10 million policy transfer. The analysis was dated after George's death, proving their continued efforts to manipulate the funds. "She built a fortress of lies and we just walked right in," Joe muttered, shaking his head. Just as we secured the evidence, Joe's phone rang. It was the officers who had been tasked with tracking Jasmine. She had been apprehended at SeaTac Airport, attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country in Southeast Asia. She was carrying a single briefcase containing over $500,000 in bearer bonds and a fake passport. The arrests of Marcus and Jasmine were the climax of the narrative. The two perpetrators, one fueled by violence and the other by cold calculation, were now in custody. I returned home to Harper, who was waiting anxiously. The moment I walked through the door, she knew. "They're in custody, honey," I told her, embracing her fiercely. "Both of them. And the money is safe. Your father made sure of it." I showed her George's final note, explaining how he had secretly protected his legacy. Harper broke down, not in fear, but in profound relief and awe of her father's foresight. "He knew," she sobbed. "He knew what Marcus was capable of. He saved me, Mum." The falling action began immediately. The news of the high-profile arrests, combining a $10 million insurance fraud with a murder cover-up, hit the Seattle news cycle like a bomb. Joe handled the official statement, ensuring the narrative focused on George's premeditated murder and the calculated abuse of Harper. He made sure to highlight my role as the dedicated mother who used her wits to expose the conspiracy. The story was everywhere. I knew the public outrage would be swift and loud. Marcus and Jasmine had used their positions of power and trust to victimize the most vulnerable, and now the community would demand justice. The era of silence was over. The stage was set for the final act, the public, irreversible fall of the perpetrators. The arrests of Marcus and Jasmine were a seismic event in Seattle's financial and social circles. The story wasn't just reported, it exploded. The combination of high-stakes fraud, a calculated murder for insurance plot, and the attempted psychological destruction of a victim made for relentless, sensational headlines. This was the moment of societal revenge, where the community's moral outrage became the final hammer of justice. I tried to keep Harper away from the worst of it, but the news was unavoidable. It was on every screen, every paper, and every social media feed. The local news channel, the one Joe had covertly shared initial information with, ran a 24-hour loop. The coverage focused heavily on the $10 million policy and the chilling details of the TTX murder. The narrative quickly shifted. Marcus, who had been seen as an ambitious, successful businessman, was exposed as a sociopathic killer. Jasmine, the trusted financial advisor, was revealed as a cold, calculating accomplice. Their reputation, which was their most valuable asset, was utterly annihilated. But the societal reaction wasn't purely positive. Just like in the original story, the whispers started, ugly and insidious. I heard them at the grocery store, in the quiet corners of the neighborhood coffee shop. Harper always seemed unstable, didn't she? Maybe she drove Marcus to it. It's just a family drama over money. The mother is a retired shrink. She probably fabricated the whole thing to get back at her son-in-law. They say that George was doing some shady things with the Alpha Group himself. Maybe Marcus was just cleaning up his mess. The public narrative, initially sympathetic, began to fray under the pressure of gossip and denial. People found it easier to believe a slightly off-kilter widow was crazy than to admit that two pillars of their financial community were cold-blooded murderers. I knew this was inevitable. People fear complexity and prefer simple narratives. The idea that a mother, fueled by grief and professionalism, could take down a conspiracy this intricate was threatening to their sense of order. I took the fight to the public sphere, but indirectly. I contacted the executive board of the Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation. I quietly shared George's final note, explaining that their charity was the rightful beneficiary of the $10 million. The foundation, armed with the evidence of George's legitimate change of beneficiary, issued a measured, powerful press release. It announced that while the funds were temporarily tied up in litigation, they were actively working to secure a magnificent $10 million donation made in the late George Jones's name to establish a new wing for pediatric mental health, a cause close to my heart, as well as George's. This move was strategic. It framed the entire case not as a messy family dispute, but as a fight between justice and pure evil. The public immediately rallied behind the children's hospital. The narrative changed from family drama to killers trying to steal money from sick kids. The moral calculus shifted irreversibly in our favor. The pressure on Marcus and Jasmine intensified. In jail, they began to turn on each other viciously, their recorded phone calls becoming new evidence for the prosecution. Marcus blamed Jasmine for creating the shell company, and Jasmine blamed Marcus for the reckless, violent assault on Harper. Meanwhile, I began the long, quiet process of healing with Harper. I used my skills not as a mother, but as a therapist, helping her process the layers of betrayal. We didn't talk about court or police. We talked about safety, boundaries, and regaining her sense of self-worth. "He called me incompetent," Harper whispered one afternoon, staring out the window at the rain. "He made me feel like I was insane for months. He needed you to be incompetent to steal your money," I explained gently. "That was his projection, not your reality. You are strong, Harper. You are a survivor. You stood up to him in that office, and that took more courage than he will ever possess." She started volunteering at a local animal shelter, reconnecting with the simple, uncomplicated act of caregiving. Slowly, the bruises faded, and the light returned to her eyes. The legal process moved forward with chilling speed. Given the mountain of evidence, the confessions, the TTX evidence, the fraudulent bank records, and the full recovery of the Alpha Group digital archives, the prosecutor was confident. He announced that he would be seeking the maximum sentence for both Marcus and Jasmine, including murder one for the death of George. We were nearing the final courtroom showdown, the formal end to the war. But the real victory had already been won. The money was safe, the killers were caged, and Harper was finding her way back to herself. The only thing left was the resolution of the court case, the final, public confirmation of their utter ruin. The long, agonizing wait was finally over. The courtroom was packed, a tangible buzz of anticipation hanging in the air. This wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was the final, public reckoning for Marcus and Jasmine. I sat beside Harper, her hand clutching mine, both of us holding our breath for the final verdict. The evidence presented by the prosecution was overwhelming. The chilling voice recordings, the forensic link between the TTX and George's death, and the meticulously forged documents from the Alpha Group proving the 10 million motive. The defense, fragmented and desperate, could only rely on painting Harper and me as unstable. But the mountain of physical proof crushed their narrative. When the judge's voice finally broke the silence, the words were like a heavy, final door slamming shut on Marcus and Jasmine's freedom. Both were found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder for George Jones and attempted murder and conspiracy for the assault on Harper. The sentence handed down was the maximum: life imprisonment without parole. Justice, cold and absolute, had been served. Leaving the courthouse, the air felt lighter, fresher. We weren't met with reporters, but with a quiet, palpable wave of relief from the crowd. The real victory wasn't just the sentence, it was the fact that our truth had triumphed over their sophisticated lies. The resolution began immediately. With the legal case closed, the $10 million policy was formally released. I stood with Harper and representatives from the Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation as we announced the funds would be used to build the George Jones Mental Health Wing. It was a beautiful, profound act of posthumous grace, ensuring George's legacy was one of healing, not betrayal. The money Marcus killed for was now saving the lives of children. Harper didn't return to her old life. She sold the apartment she shared with Marcus and moved into a new, smaller home across town. The emotional scars remained, but the strength I saw in her now was unbreakable. She didn't just survive, she rebuilt. She enrolled in a counseling program, dedicating her future to helping victims of narcissistic abuse, turning her pain into purpose. One evening, I found her on my porch, tending to my geraniums, the same spot where she had collapsed almost a year prior. "I found a letter," she said softly, holding a worn envelope. "From Marcus. He sent it right after the sentencing, apologizing. He mentioned he was finding God in prison." I took a deep breath. "What do you think, honey?" "I think it's just another performance," she replied, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "But I realized something, Mum. I don't need to forgive him to be free. Forgiveness is for me, not for him. And I have already let go of the anger. I don't carry his weight anymore." That was the deepest form of humanistic healing. She had achieved the impossible, true liberation from her abuser, not through an act of mercy, but through an act of self-preservation. My life, too, had changed. I wasn't just Dr. Abby, the retired psychologist. I was the fierce matriarch who saved her daughter and honored her husband's memory. I resumed my work, taking on pro bono cases for victims of financial abuse, using the tools I acquired during this terrible war. Harper and I often sit together on that front porch now, watching the Seattle fog roll in, sipping coffee. The silence between us is no longer tense. It is the comfortable quiet of two people who have survived the worst and emerged stronger. The past is a shadow, but our future is wide open, built on the solid foundation of unwavering love and the hard-won clarity of truth. Justice was served, and our family, broken and then rebuilt, finally found its peace. This story reminds us that trust can be shattered, often by those closest to us. But even the deepest betrayal can lead to the greatest resilience. Have you ever had to fight for the truth when everyone around you doubted you? What gave you the strength to stand up to the impossible? Share your story in the comments below. We'll be reading every single one. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next chapter of True Crime and Justice.